As we begin our ministry with you, Emily and I will be experimenting with some ways of doing things. And one of those experiments is to divide the year into 4 liturgical arcs, 4 kind of seasons of our worship life together. And this first one, we are telling the story. Our hope is that Sunday services will tell the story of turning toward one another. The story of ingathering, of sharing. That'll be kind of now until near the end of November. So when we use that closing song that we're going to use today, we'll use it for this whole arc, and then don't worry, we're going to go back to, we take an hour leave for the next arc. So just in case anybody's already nervous about that. And then each month we're going to ask a question that kind of fits into that larger story. So this first month of September, we're starting with the question, how do we belong together? That active idea of how do we actively belong together with one another. And in that vein, would you humor me with a few more questions? Can I get you to raise your hand a few more times? So if you consider this to be a home, your spiritual home, whether you use that S word or not, would you raise your hand? Wonderful. And you can look around and see who else is raising their hand too. You might be surprised when something new at some point in here. How about if you're just visiting, checking things out, this is your first time even? Anybody else besides me just checking things out? Okay, great. Good. Excellent. We're in good company. And how about in between? Anybody feel in between one of those two places? Great. And how about if you have been coming long enough, or you're just kind of in it enough that you consider yourself a leader here, self-described in any way? If you're a leader in some way or another, will you raise your hand? Oh, I know there's a few more of you. Yeah, okay. And how about if you've been here long enough, your kids have grown up through the RE program, and maybe they've even gone off on their own now, somewhere else. Yeah. And how about if you grew up in this church yourself? Anyone? I know there are a couple, yeah. And those who maybe grew up in another Unitarian Universalist institution. I grew up in our church down in Oakland. A few other lifers. And how about, are there anybody here who was part of that first group that founded this congregation? Anybody who was part of those fellowship meetings back in the 60s? Maybe signed those documents in 67, 2, 3, 4? Yeah, we still are a young enough congregation. Really are a young enough congregation to have founding members still here with us. Good. And so now, whether it's been that long or not, if you've just been, however long you've been here, raise your hand if you are sitting in the same seat you sit in every week. That's all? Okay, yeah. You can always pass. You don't have to. Yeah, I pick one of those right over there. I like to mix it around in church, but I understand the impulse. So, and now really just because I'm curious, if you were, if you can remember back to grade 7 or grade 8, and if you had your choice, I know many didn't, but if you had a choice, where would you have sat in the room? In the classroom, say. Front of the room, right where the teacher can see your hand as soon as it shot up. Okay. Oh, interesting, with that front of the room side over here. And back of the room? We got back of the room. Oh, it's a back of the room kind of crowd. These are good things to know. And anybody just had somewhere in the middle? I think that was me, actually. Yeah, somewhere in the middle. It depends on the teacher. I kind of bounce back and forth. And how about also grade 7, grade 8? Raise your hand if you wore a seatbelt. If seatbelts existed in the cars and you were in that era. Yeah? Okay. Me too. And how about if you learned the Dewey Decimal System? Is it the Dewey Decimal System here in Canada? Dewey Decimal System, did you learn that in school? Like on card catalogs growing up? Not me. No, I didn't learn that. How about, did you visit your grandparents on a farm? Anybody visit, your grandparents were kind of on a farm and they've been for generations? And anybody yourself grew up on a farm? Handful. Change, right? So, what about if you came home from school for lunch each day? Yeah. It's another world. And now raise your hand if growing up you learned how to type while you were growing up. No. Okay, now keep it up if you learned on a computer. All right, how about on an electric keyboard? Electric typewriter and manual? Okay, well, we're pretty evenly distributed. That's good. Okay, good. Oh, that's good enough for now. Thank you. So reading. It's from the poet Drew Dellinger. It's called Hieroglyphic Staircase. Just the first piece of it. It's a long poem. It's 3:23 in the morning, and I'm awake because my great-great-grandchildren won't let me sleep. My great-great-grandchildren ask me in dreams, "What did you do while the planet was plundered? What did you do when the earth was unraveling? Surely you did something. When the seasons started failing? As the mammals, reptiles, birds were all dying, did you fill the streets with protest when democracy was stolen? What did you do once you knew?" I heard Drew perform this poem when I was in the midst of my seminary training. And I was hunting, for meaning and hope amidst a world that seemed so bleak with chaos and catastrophe. As I darted between classes at school and the Occupy Wall Street, Occupy Oakland encampment nearby, and back up to the Unitarian Church where I was serving as intern minister, trying to figure out how to tell just the right story for all ages each Sunday to give my community sustenance, spiritual sustenance, the poet's question hit home for me. What did you do once you knew? What was I doing in this precarious moment in time, this moment ripe with both possibility and ruin? I've been influenced by an idea from the social scientist Elise Boulding. She says that to answer a question like that, to seek ethical participation in our human community at this time requires a shift in our perspective on time. So she described that 200-year present. But trying to think of that kind of time span in numbers from, say, 1916 to 2116, it doesn't really do us much good. Instead, imagine, if you will, this present moment that spans from the time when the oldest person that you know, or the oldest person in your family, was born, until the time when the youngest person in your family, the youngest person you know, would die of old age. The oldest person in our family is Emily's grandmother, Edith. Edith, she's 94 years old and remarkably enough lives in Rochester, New York, where we just moved from. We were lucky enough to be able to visit with her regularly the past couple of years. She's been living in nursing homes for a few years now. She is one of the sweetest, most gracious people I've ever met. She regularly responds to whatever's just been said by saying, "Well, my stars." She calls her attendants at the nursing home her earth angels. And she glows. She glows with the easy warmth of a life lived centered on love. And yet these past few years, she's also struggled with the question, why am I still here? With the body's aches and pains, with the difficulty to take care of even simple tasks, with the struggle to find any meaning and purpose in day-to-day life, why am I still here? Now, the youngest person in our family, of course, is Henry. Henry will clock in at a full 10 months next week. And on Edith's 94th birthday, we surprised her with a visit from her newborn grandson. Great-grandson, sorry. This is important. Newborn great-grandson. Well, now, she told us, now I know why I'm still here. From the time that Edith was born until Henry will pass away, can I imagine that as the present moment? When I do, I am almost overwhelmed by the pace of change in our 200-year present. When I imagine Edith's parents giving birth to their child in 1922, I don't think they could have imagined this world that their daughter lives in now. I'm sure I can't fathom the world that Henry will grow old in. Just the other day, I heard they were planning to get driverless cars onto the market by 2021. Henry will be 5 years old. He might never ever learn how to drive. And that's what I can imagine? The pace of change in this 200-year present surpasses anything our species has known before. It really does. And at the same time that this pace of change, this pace of life has rapidly increased, the time spans that we think in have shortened. So many human societies throughout history have had concepts for thinking in long time stretches. In India originated the Hindu idea of the kalpas. They were, let me get this right, 4,000 million years of human reckoning. That was a kalpa. Or the Babylonians had a concept that was later adopted by Greeks and then by medieval Christendom. They called it the Great Year, which was a 36,000-year cycle, after which history was thought to repeat itself. The Iroquois, the First Nations people whose land we just moved here from, thought each decision should be made with 7 generations in mind. You've probably heard that idea. And now, while we talk occasionally about big time spans, 14 billion years since the beginning of the universe, or that the universe has been expanding, or that's beyond me, but 14 billion years, and then 4.5 billion years that our planet has been around, we talk about these things, and yet I think we have a hard time as a society, as a culture, making decisions beyond the next financial quarter. It's become our benchmark of time. In another study that was just put out last year, it showed in the past 15 years, as mobile devices have become ubiquitous, average attention span, and they're talking about some brain measurement attention span, in this country, dropped from 12 seconds to 8 seconds. A third drop in the last 15 years. And I should admit that I think I'm probably particularly sensitive to all this fast-paced moving stuff after the summer that we've just had. If any of you were considering moving 5,000 kilometers to a new country with a baby, I just invite you to come make an appointment and speak with us before you make your plans. Oh, and when we got here, there was the excitement of starting with you all. We kicked off August in high gear, meeting with as many folks as we could, making all sorts of plans for the year, and as we met with people, we kept moving fast as we could, settling into our home, registering the cars, getting them, the importing and the licensing, and it's actually all much more sane here than it is in the States, but it was still quite an ordeal, and getting Henry settled at daycare, and so we're excited, and we feel your excitement, and then, shockingly, we ran out of gas. Last weekend, we planned to be with the religious education teachers for the retreat all weekend long. We made it through Friday night, and we just hit a wall. I got quite sick. We had to slow down. How many times do I have to learn this lesson? But at one point in that flurry of activity, I described in my check-in at a meeting that I felt like I had one foot heavy on the gas and one foot firmly on the brakes. We're excited, we feel your readiness, your eagerness to get on the move with us, and yet we also know we need to slow down, to pace things. We're in it here for the long haul. And then I was thinking about that check-in the days after I had said it, and I was thinking about that one foot on the brake and one foot on the gas, and that is a terrible idea. It's really, really dangerous, bad for the car, and you're not getting anywhere, but you're also not resting. Well, that's not going to work. And we saw a documentary around then about Tony Robbins. You know Tony Robbins, a life coach, kind of internationally renowned, smart, wholehearted guy. And at one point in the film, he had this line that really landed for me. He said, people overestimate what they can accomplish in a day or a week, and they underestimate what they can accomplish in 10 or 15 years. So this frenetic pace of change, I think it has a tremendous impact on our lives, even when we're not doing crazy things like moving across the country or to a new country with a baby. But because our bodies, which includes our minds, have not suddenly started evolving more quickly to keep up. No, while we adapt, and we do adapt incredibly well and change, our human needs, our spiritual needs, they remain the same. And I think our culture is just beginning to reflect on the cost to the human psyche of all this speed and convenience. But it's happening. I've heard on CBC a few times now about this book, Overscheduled Andrew. You've been hearing about Overscheduled Andrew? It's a children's book. I've literally, at least 4 times I've heard it mentioned, and I think it struck a nerve. Beyond our personal lives as well, beyond our personal busyness, sometimes overwhelm, this pace of change in this moment in history has also dramatically altered our understanding of world community. The reality of living globally interconnected lives has never been clearer. And neither has that reality, again, been more full with promise or with threat. Both are present. And I know this is a slightly dangerous territory now as an American immigrating to Canada, but I have to lift up on this 15th anniversary of September 11th, 2001, that event and all that's followed, because in some ways I believe it still continues to signify something important about our 200-year present. When I woke up to the news of those planes destroying the Twin Towers that morning, I was getting ready for my first week of grade 10. I remember the morning very clearly. It's one of those flashbulb memory moments for Americans, at least. Do you remember where you were that morning? Yeah. And perhaps especially for a generation just coming of age at that time, September 11th signified and continues to signify some critical ideas. And so here are 2 of them, I think. First, the role of religion in the world. Sitting atop news headlines alongside the Catholic sex abuse scandal, alongside Christian evangelicals proudly asserting their homophobia, alongside the ugly, shameful fight against safe, legal abortion, September 11th became yet another symbol that religion is a source of violence and division and hatred in the world. For a lot of folks. Why aren't millennials going to church? Why would they if that's what religion wants for the world? And the second critical symbol was a loss of naive optimism. And of course, that happens every generation or so. But in broad brushstrokes, we had the 1990s full of promise and prosperity after the stark evil of the rest of the 20th century in some ways, the World War I and II, after finally resolving that Cold War. It seemed perhaps we were back on track for the long envisioned dream of world community with, how do we say it in our principles, with peace, justice, and equity for all. This has been a central hope of our religion since long before those principles were written. Near the end of the 1880s, this is the quick aside for a little history. Near the end of the 1880s, the Unitarian minister James Freeman Clark, he penned the unabashedly optimistic 5 points of the new theology. The manifesto concluded with the belief in the progress of mankind onward and upward forever. You know that sentiment, right? It's a beautiful sentiment. It's deeply embedded in our faith, in our way of seeing the world as modernists, as inheritors of the Enlightenment. But whether your symbol is 9/11, or was Nazi Germany, or the atomic bomb, or the climate crisis, it's clear such a hopeful trajectory is not guaranteed. Belonging to this moment, this 200-year present, means finding a way to stay faithful to our convictions in the face of grave uncertainty. And to belong to a religious, a spiritual community as this community in this 200-year present means we will have to tell a different story about the purpose and effect of religion. And the good news is that's exactly what our tradition is all about. As in those beautiful words that Liana shared this morning from Unitarian minister Nancy Schaefer, in our tradition we practice holding all truths ever wider. The promise of our religion in this time is the wholehearted embrace of pluralism, the community that sets aside arguing over beliefs to do the work of love and justice. We accepted your call to serve as ministers of this congregation because it is clear to Emily and to me that this is a spiritual community ready to do that work. In every meeting we've had so far, we've heard you talk about your vision for the future, your hopes and dreams for a new church home, your longing to do church in new ways. We hear your desire for change. And for some of you, I'm guessing, the changes you've already experienced this morning, the order of service, the announcements, the foyer, well, they're probably already feeling like a lot, and we haven't even gotten to that closing song yet. And others of you are probably feeling like we're barely scratching the surface of the changes that you'd like to see. You want a church that is vibrant and relevant today, that is relevant to the next generation of Unitarian Universalists. You want a church where young families feel welcome, as do elders and as do parents whose children have just left home. You want a church that keeps pace with the culture, but doesn't get swept away in its frenzy. Because church is one of those places we come to be reminded of the 200-year present, where we come and are connected to those who have come before and those who will come after us. We have to remember, amidst our excitement for the bright new future, to stop and savor this present moment. So when I find myself holding down the gas and the brake, it's time to pull the car over and get out, to take a walk in Ferdinand's field and smell the flowers. Driverless cars will probably be a wonderful thing. I'm looking forward to keeping my feet off the gas and the brake. And it'll be a great and wonderful thing to move to a new building someday when that happens. But meanwhile, with our regular old cars and our regular old church building, we have to remember to smell the flowers that are already right here. As we start this ministry with you, as we together face into an uncertain future, full of possibility, both for awful devastation and tremendous beauty, let's dream big about what we can accomplish in the next 10 to 15 years. And let's also remember to slow down. Walk together in Ferdinand's field and smell the flowers. Amen, and may that be so.